Stage 1. The threshold of the map. You open the underground mind map, a living atlas where daily digital footprints color entire districts and data streams stitch the nation together. Every algorithmic street posts its own rules, channeling engagement into repeating patterns that isolate communities into mirrored cells. Clinical anxiety has climbed sharply among young people. On the map, those spikes stain the urban terrain and pulse with each notification. Gig and precarious work reshape neighborhoods, 65% of workers marked by instability that slowly erodes psychological resilience. News deserts expand, leaving informational voids that amplify uncertainty and fracture local trust. A political trust gap opens between city and countryside. 20 points that show up as diverging algorithmic currents on your map. You demonstrate how recommendation engines carve streets that only reflect what already exists, tightening borders around belief communities. Surveillance and shifting norms are the map's compass, quietly redirecting flows of attention and trust. Economic strain carves out pressure chambers, visible heat maps where stress crystallizes into patterned behavior. With foundational layers stored, you prepare to descend into the social cartography, the systems that echo and reflect our online lives. The threshold map stands complete, a nation segmented by digital rivers and economic geology that shape daily behavior.
This cartography is flawed. The echoes
Stage 2. The Cartography of Echoes.
We anticipated this deviation.
You enter the social media district, where algorithmic streets curate what people see and reel them into repetitive corridors of content. Advertising digs down to the block, converting personal data into targeted nudges that steer emotional responses. Simulations show how repeated exposure cements beliefs, algorithms turning diversity into repetition and isolating users in self-confirming loops. Walls between communities grow thicker as recommendation algorithms reduce cross-talk and shrink the public square. Resilience and social norms appear as fragile bridges, easy to erode when constant algorithmic pressure pulls at their foundations. Profiles become distorted mirrors, targeted content, and endless comparison layers that nudge self-perception toward instability. Taken together, these streets and feeds reveal a system that shapes feeling and behavior through curated repetition. Adjust one variable and narratives repeat. With most users encountering the same curated stories day after day, echo chambers deepen. Ads and comparison cues are engineered to engage, and in youth demographics they correlate with rising comparison stress. Where algorithmic pressure meets social comparison, anxiety concentrates, visible clusters forming across the digital terrain. Every algorithmic nudge can reduce intergroup communication, in some simulations by roughly 25%, reinforcing belief silos. Continuous monitoring and shifting norms subtly retune what communities accept as normal, widening trust gaps across regions. Economic precarity concentrates where gig work dominates. Financial anxiety becomes a driver of digital escapism and dependence on curated feeds. The Cartography of Echoes is complete, exposing systemic patterns that lead into personal mirrors and feedback loops. Stage 3. The Hall of Mirrors. You enter the hall where profiles reflect back distorted identities, feeds, ads, and comparisons that reshape how people see themselves. Each swipe layers another metric on identity, likes and ads stacking stress like bricks. Feedback loops create self-reinforcing cycles. What users see shapes what they engage with, and engagement feeds the cycle again. High comparison and low resilience show up as yellow warnings, pockets where self-awareness is most distorted by feed dynamics. Echo chambers act like rooms of mirrors. They reflect familiar views and hide alternate perspectives, corroding shared norms. The psychological cost appears as behavior change, less offline interaction, fractured sleep, and more time tethered to screens. Where economic and digital pressures intersect, personal stress concentrates, systemic forces folding into individual experience. Digital rivers carry feelings across the map, shaped and diverted by the algorithmic channels they pass through. The Hall of Mirrors shows the cumulative toll, personal narratives bent by design, visible across the networked landscape. With personal mirrors documented, you prepare to trace the systemic pressures that compress and corrode community resilience. The integrated map reveals a nation under compounded pressure, algorithmic echoes and personal distortions converging into systemic trends. Stage 3 closes. The costs of curated digital life are mapped. Now you turn to the pressure chambers those costs create. Stage 4. The pressure chamber. Economic pressure zones crystallize where unstable work dominates. 65% in some areas, a foundation for mounting stress. Within those zones, anxiety indicators climb and offline engagement drops. People drift toward digital channels for relief. Economic precarity shows up as streaming data. Each number another pulse of instability feeding the map. Information deserts have widened. A 25% erosion of local coverage that increases reliance on curated feeds. Where local reporting fades, susceptibility to misinformation grows. Trust phrase and echo chambers gain purchase. As community news outlets vanish, algorithmic feeds move in to fill the void, not with reporting, but with curated narratives. Trust diverges across the map, a roughly 20-point split that reorients how communities interpret information and each other. Low-trust areas show frayed norms and falling resilience. The result is pressure chambers where bad information and stress reinforce one another. Trust metrics flow in opposing directions, a visible fracture in the social fabric your map now charts. When instability, information gaps, and declining trust converge, they form high-pressure chambers that amplify psychological strain. Inside these chambers, apathy and anger grow. The map records a steep drop in local civic participation. Communities disengage. Pressure chambers encapsulate communities, digital and economic forces combining to shape emotion, behavior, and belonging. Systemic pressures show clear mental health impacts, localized anxiety clusters rising in step with economic precariousness. Having mapped the pressure, you position potential exits, interventions that could act as social antibodies. Stage 4 closes. Systemic pressures are mapped, and candidate strategies for relief are now visible on the terrain. Stage 5 exit rites. Rites begin with deliberate interventions, limits on algorithmic reach, spaces for community conversation, and tools to rebuild local information flows. Each icon represents an antibody, a targeted measure to slow harmful flows and restore civic bandwidth. Simulations of algorithmic limits show promising effects, modeled anxiety reductions on the order of 20% in treated areas. Community dialogue initiatives can restore participation. Models indicate roughly a 15% recovery where people are given space to reconnect. Information tools can seed news deserts, bringing local stories back into circulation and undercutting misinformation. When combined, these strategies yield stronger resilience, simulated improvements that suggest a measurable path to recovery. Exit rites transform pressure chambers into adaptive zones. Algorithmic routes and economic markers shift toward stability. Captures how major trends, from gig work to daily platform use, weave together to shape national psychology and how targeted interventions can redirect those. Stage 5 concludes with exit strategies embedded. Blueprints for resilience against the algorithms and surveillance patterns that structure modern life. Back knowing the work is ongoing, adaptation, vigilance, and design will be required to address rising anxiety and widening trust divides across the landscape.